episode of Big Dress Energy, the podcast with me, Shakaila, your favorite fashion psychologist. If you have gotten to this point, thank you so much for coming on this journey. We've learned a lot, we've laughed a lot, we've shared so many interesting details and learnings about fashion style, beauty, body confidence, and just so much more. And I'm excited to round off this season with someone that is very close to my heart and somebody that you probably know already, Caryn Franklin. Caryn Franklin MBE is a British fashion and identity commentator and visiting professor of diverse selfhood. She was a former fashion editor and co-editor of ID magazine in the 1980s and a long-time presenter of BBC Television's The Clothes Show. In 2013, she received an MBE for services to positive body image and diversity in fashion. And I think most importantly for me, she is my former classmate at London College of Fashion. We were one of the first cohort of students to get a master's degree in psychology for fashion professionals. So thank you so much, Caryn, for joining me today. How are you?
I'm great, and so lovely to catch up with you after nearly a decade, really, when we were co-pupils, as it were, and to follow your journey. It's been amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. God, yeah, we started in, was it like 2014, 15, something like that? God, that seems like a lifetime ago. God, it seems like a lifetime. Well, I'm so grateful to be having you on this journey with me. And I'm going to ask you a question I ask everybody. So you know my book is titled Big Dress Energy.
Absolutely.
So I always ask people, what does big dress energy mean to you?
In one word, confidence. Understanding that what you have chosen amplifies your presence and your self-esteem and your self-efficacy. When we are feeling good about what we're wearing, we're not using up valuable mental resources, checking ourselves out in shop windows or any mirror we can find because we're not sure, does this go with this? Should I have worn that? That feeling of knowing why you've chosen something and stepping into it because you know it works, you know it flatters, you know it delivers the sort of right optics, different clothes for different jobs, different events, different appearances. So, yep, I'm doing this, I'm going to wear that. And then you make that impact and you just get to bask in it, but enjoy being in yourself, not sort of viewing yourself from the outside and checking that you look okay. Big Dress Energy. It's a brilliant title, actually. Did it take you long to come up with?
I cannot take any credit for that title. It was my editor. She called me when I was in Tesco. She was like, what about this one? Because the ones I had been saying were not very good. She came up with it and I said, I dropped my vegetables. I said, that is it. And I ran home and I told everyone. So thank you so much. But I think you summed it up perfectly. I think thinking about clothes as something that's very personal is something that we all should be doing more of. I love to ask people that question, why did you wear that? And you could almost see like a bit of fear come in their eyes because they actually, most of the time, they don't know. They're almost operating on autopilot and dressing maybe for occasions or for external validation, which you said like we all do. It's important to like manage expectations and manage how you want to show up in the world. But it's definitely important to have that self-efficacy, like you said, and understand how you want to feel and use your clothes to navigate that. So brilliant answer as expected. But I want to get into a bit of the history. So let's talk a bit about the Clothes Show. Like, can you tell us more about your experience of, your experience of that? How was it? I've heard murmurings of it coming back. I would love to see it back. I think there's a big gap in TV when it comes to fashion. I just think it was so brilliant. And I would love for you to just take us a bit down memory lane and talk us through your experience of Clothes Show.
Okay, so, if you think about fashion in the UK was in its infancy. So we had only just joined the international fashion circuit with London Fashion Week in 1984. And I'd been working at ID magazine since 1982. And there was very much interest in London street style, although it wasn't formalized. So we would often have Japanese camera crews come through the door and go, tell us all about the London designers that we should be featuring. Nobody else wanted to do it. So I, obviously fashion was my thing anyway. So I'd go, okay, let's go. I'll take you to the studio of this person or that person. Let's go and chat to them. And I'd give them a list and I'd effectively do their research for them, really.
Yeah.
And that happened quite a bit with UK magazine shows like The Tube, which was a sort of big show up in Newcastle. I'd take designers up there. There was a magazine show called The South of Watford. And then there was also a Channel 4 show called Swank, which they came to me and asked me to effectively produce the fashion stories, all unpaid. But it was all about promoting London fashion. And I also did Network 7. So I was working on the magazine, but I was also kind of, 1 foot in broadcast.
Yeah.
And I started the clothes show in 1986. I actually said no thank you to it because I thought it was very mainstream.
Ah.
But Terry, the editor of ID, said, "Well, why don't you do it and then get them to put Caryn Franklin from ID magazine underneath when you pop up on screen? So that could be our advertising because ID back in the day didn't have a budget." What was amazing was I realized that I was in a fashion bubble, working sort of in and around London and sort of international fashion. And suddenly I moved into a space which was much more Middle England and began to understand how fashion affected, how fashion's sort of awarding itself as the authority on taste and how much authority it did have in people's lives. And one of the things that struck me really quickly was the unachievable body ideals that my industry was starting to promote. Because when you work in street styles, you work with street casting. So I'd never thought about that before. The
Mhm.
plus of the clothes show was that it was on the BBC, and in those days there were only 4 channels. I know that's hard to imagine, people. Um, so
I
the
tell my
really,
niece and nephew that all the time. They don't know how good they have it. They have all the YouTube, and I was like, we only used to have a few channels back then.
I know, and that I think is what helped the clothes show to be successful, because we did have a regular audience of 13 million, and we also went through BBC World Service to a global audience of up to 150 million. So I like to think that we did make a contribution in promoting UK fashion around the world. What I loved about the clothes show was that 1 minute we might be in Milan, or we might be doing Vivienne Westwood or Alexander McQueen, but we would also then visit someone in a tiny, maybe even in their shed, making something and then talking about their passion. It was very inclusive, so that
Yeah.
everybody got to feel that anyone who wears clothes, their opinion matters.
Hmm.
So one of the lovely things, even now, because I did it from 1986 to 1998, so that 12 years of primetime TV meant that a lot of people still come up to me in the street and go, "I grew up with you," and that's very nice. It's a nice feeling.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm so happy to hear that. And like, it's so true what you said about accessibility. It did feel like Close Show was almost like a peek behind the curtain for people who maybe didn't have as much access or maybe it wasn't like super in the know. It just gave it that wide stream, like wide mainstream appeal. And I feel like it's something we can definitely do more of now. I know social media has done a good job of democratizing fashion and allowed like more people from different platforms and different walks of life to be in fashion, but I still do feel like we need that kind of centralized location. I don't know if you feel like that we need that fashion edge on like mainstream TV still, or do you think it's kind of had its time?
Well, research shows that certainly. Well, I'll answer this in 2 points. We did reboot the clothes show in about 2007 for about 2 years. Not on the BBC; it went out on UK TV Style, but by that point, everybody's got whatever, the clickers, so that, oh, this is boring, I'll just go and see what's on the other channel, which again you
Yeah.
didn't used to do. You had to get up and turn it over, and there wasn't that
Yeah.
much on the other channel.
Yeah.
So what we also found out by that point was that people were much more, that the the sort of age group that was watching was much more interested not in the politics of fashion, not in the sort of context, which I think Clothes Show did do reasonably well, but much more in the novelty and in the bright colours and the glamour and the celebrity. So the audience themselves were dictating that they wanted a more niche approach. And I think that's what we'd find today is that people have been, for want of a better word, fairly spoilt that they can have niche viewing direct to them. So something that had such wide stream appeal, all things to everyone, might not find its footing in the same way because people do want very specialized information. And we've gotten used to it as well.
Yeah, we definitely have. And then, but it's true. It's almost like we've gone full circle because now, like you said, people are spoiled and they're just kind of doing this endless scroll. And they're just, I feel like there might be a need for that more in-depth, like research and content. But again, it's like shifting behavioral patterns when it comes to that, and I just think maybe that's a broader discussion. But I know I definitely miss it. I grew up on things like that, and there's you and like Trini and Susanna and Gok and like people like that, and I just feel like there's this gap missing, and I'm sure I'm not the only one.
It's quite possible you're not. The other thing we're up against, and I have tried over the years to help program sort of producers understand that in the way that football is viewed, the pre-match amble, the live match action, the post-match dissection, the player news, the industry news, that fashion can be viewed like that. It's not just about clothes and trends. It's so much bigger than that. And I think that is what Clothes Show did well, was give people an understanding of the industry. And coming back to my point of people saying, oh, I grew up with you, people will also say, I'm in the industry now because the Clothes Show showed me an industry that I was excited to join, even though I didn't come from any kind of fashion background. So I think there's still a bias that somehow fashion is frivolous. It's a girl thing. And maybe the bigger powers don't think it goes across a broader audience spectrum in the way that, let's say, food, property, travel, those things do. And so, how many food shows have we got? Loads. There's even whole networks dedicated to them. But there's just this perception that fashion is very niche and very gendered.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And just on the topic of like changing media landscapes when it talks to fashion, I don't know if you've seen in like recent news about ID and how it's kind of just crumbling at this point and it's being sold off. I mean, that must be like so heartbreaking for you to witness something that you have been so instrumental in like creating and championing. Just to see what's happened to it now. Like, do you have any thoughts on that, or why do you think this is happening now?
Well, I mean, interestingly, ID started with another magazine called The Face and a magazine called The Blitz. And they all started in 1980. And ID is the only one to have continued. So in a way, it got longer than we thought it would. Even when I was working on ID, Terry Jones, who was the founder and the art director for a very long time, would often say, oh, I don't know if I can afford to produce it this month. It didn't have big mainstream distribution. It didn't have backers. So it's amazing that it's gone on as long as it has. I think, again, the marketplace is absolutely packed to the gills. So people are choosing niche publications, whether, they've got massive choice online. We now listen to podcasts. So it may be that it will change in order to represent itself as a kind of modern vehicle. I don't know what that change needs to be. I do think the thing I still love to this day about ID is that it has always created a kind of coverage of young up and coming ideas people. It's not like they had to be famous before they got coverage. You know, it started doing that in the beginning, and it's always still done that. So it sort of presents tomorrow's change makers today, and I think it does that very well.
Yeah,
So hopefully it can continue.
hopefully. I've always practiced my, the one eye thing. I always practice what mine would be, and then now it's going. So I'm going to be behind the campaign to keep it up until I can get there. But I want to shift gears a bit and talk a bit more about psychology. But of course, that's both of our backgrounds. I want to know a bit more about how it influences your work, maybe now, and how it used to influence your work. Because speaking to you, as much as now fashion psychology is being touted as something new, it sounds like it's always been part of your practice and something that you've always considered. I just want to know, yeah, what is your relationship with fashion and psychology from like more of a personal perspective?
That's a really good question. I think I always interacted with fashion through emotional intelligence. I have three sisters and a mother, you know, and as a younger woman, they were much younger and very interested in, oh, tell us what, you know, what should we choose? Will you come out shopping with us? And I noticed that kind of almost level of not quite confident somehow. Oh, somebody in fashion will tell you the right way to be. So I started to think about self-esteem, and I've also interacted with fashion from a feminist perspective. And so maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, but although I didn't name it as male gaze for myself back then, I recognized that the way in which fashion was promoted didn't serve the ordinary woman. And also, there's a mad fashion industry bubble thinking around how models should present. And it's really just for the convenience of the designer, who it's a very expensive process to put on a show. You can't tailor make garments to a wide range of individual body shapes. But it had gotten so the body was serving the garment, and these certainly young women were living on starvation rations really in order to be able to go onto the catwalk. So I became very vocal about that, and as it became more and more of a thing with me, and I gathered a little bit more power, I started to be able to challenge senior leadership teams. But I was very aware that emotional intelligence and feminism was not enough, because I was mostly talking to male leaders at that point. And so that's when it made sense to, apply for the same course that you did, in order to be able to really talk from a much more knowledgeable perspective about impact, and to not go, look, I feel this because I'm a woman and I talk to other women and we all feel underserved by fashion's messaging and product. When I was on TV, primetime TV every week when I was expecting my first child, Matilda, who's now 31. But there wasn't any decent maternity wear. It's almost as though back then, you sort of got by in baggy clothes. And because I was on a fashion program, I've always been able to make clothes, and I've always been a good stylist. So I started to create my own adaptions in order to still feel like I was delivering a look. But, that's a classic space that has now been exploited, for want of a better word. People understand that women need good maternity wear. I also felt very much that, back in the day, and the clothes show did feature older models, but that we never saw fashion on good-looking older women. And it's not just for the older women to see themselves, it's for younger women to see where they're going, and to not kind of be given this sort of unspoken messaging that, once you get to a certain age, you just have to become invisible. You just got to go away. You won't be interested in fashion. When in fact, we know that women over 40 have 4 times as much to spend on one garment than the sort of 18 to 24 age group. I mean, it's not rocket science, So for me, because I was lucky enough really very early on, not to get sucked up into a fashion vacuum, I stepped into a mainstream arena through the Clothes Show and Clothes Show Live, that I really got educated about, women's needs generally, not specifically. Not that, okay, if you've got the money and you can fit into designer samples, you're sorted. That's a very small portion of women who get to see themselves, and everybody else had to make do. So I think, again, that's one of the things that was also training with the Clothes Show, rather than had I just been on a fashion magazine, because back in the day people didn't know what fashion editors looked like, but they really knew what I looked like, so they would step up with all their complaints about the fashion industry, no matter what I was doing when I was outside of my house. And so it was an incredible education.
You said so many amazing things there, and I know there's so much research about women and clothing and how it shapes their sense of self. And I read this piece of research that said that when women enter their 30s, they start adopting this idea of mutton dressed as lamb, and they believe that certain styles are just no longer for them. And even from childhood, young girls are very much concerned with their appearance and how it impacts the way that they are socialized and the way that people perceive them, whereas young boys do not experience that. And I know there's research of women, they're going through maternity, how, yes, the clothes that are afforded to them, they're drastically different from what they usually wear and what they usually feel is expression of who they are. So they lose their sense of self. So I do think that's just so important that you mentioned that. One thing I wanted to talk about that you've mentioned on your social media in a similar vein is about, the recent Calvin Klein campaign. And you talked before about the male gaze. And I think right now, some women, I know something I thought about the line between maybe like objectification and empowerment. Like, how can you really tell where that is? How can you look at an ad and see that as being objectification, but then maybe someone else could see it as empowerment? Like, how do you kind of differentiate that?
That is a really excellent question. And sometimes there aren't simple answers. When we look at the research, what we can see is that humans, both men and women, when they are shown images of semi-naked humans, other humans, both men and women, they objectify them. That is, they award that person lesser moral and intellectual agency. And so if we look at women in our media, we are more often going to present as semi-naked, scantily clad, sexualized, or overtly passive and perfected, serving male gaze. So that repetition over and over again, it's one of the early things you learn in psychology, isn't it? How is knowledge gained? It goes in with emotion and sensation, but repetition as well. So little girls and boys internalize the information that we're seeing about one gender being dehumanized in our media. And that doesn't just end with the picture. So Jo Swinson, I worked with Government Ministry of Equality, Jo Swinson, and she did a rapid evidence study of 172 studies to be able to make a statement that because of the amount of objectification of women in our media, this impacts on our political, social, and economic power. So in other words, if a woman is perhaps up for, let's just say, up for leadership, there are so many things that can impact other people's perception of her. One of the, obviously many of the complaints are that she will be seen as baby making fodder and not committed. So she's either going to have children or she's got children and she's responsible. She does 90% of the domestic chores. But there is also that depersonalization that goes on when it comes to, does this person have moral and intellectual status. And so our perceptions are that we often have been encouraged to view women as a body so much that our sense of them as powerful, authoritative leaders is diminished. And studies, what I just said there isn't sort of a direct link there, it's perception, but studies show that men and women choose men as leaders for a huge variety of reasons. And so to come back to your question, which isn't simple to answer, because yes, women should be able to enjoy their sexuality and their sexual empowerment and feel really great about themselves in and out of clothes. But in a public arena, when we know what happens because of the way that men consume women and because of the power imbalance and the gender ranking, I guess we have to question, do women have a safe space in which to display that sexuality? One of the things that I did was link up with a forensic psychologist, Dr. Dominic Wilmot, because I wanted to write about this. And he's been very vocal on psychometric testing that he has done for jurors in rape trials, to the point where he can predict who will vote in favour of the attacker and who will victim blame the rape survivor. And as we know, don't know if this is getting too deep for you. Do stop me, Shakaila, if I'm going.
No, I love stuff like this.
The statistics of rape trials are that only 2% find in favour of the female survivor. All the others find in favour of the attacker because of the victim blaming, because of well, she shouldn't have worn that dress. She went out on her own. Oh, was she drinking? Oh, did she look at her attacker somehow before? Did she make an invitation? Did she talk to them? Did she even agree perhaps to go in a car? Or, all of these things which are then put on her that she didn't try hard enough to keep herself safe. Now, I suggest that that is the embodiment of finding women sort of the diminished personhood, the lesser moral and intellectual status. It must be her fault. She made some. She didn't think hard enough. She should have thought harder. And so I felt that this was so important. I wanted to write about this and help all of us understand that is what happens in our media. So we don't have a simple answer here, but when I looked at, for instance, because I commented on the Calvin Klein ad, that was male photographers. How do we not know? It was very obviously male clients. And I know that the very talented model herself said that it was her choice. But how can we account for the amount of acculturation around male gaze that we've all absorbed growing up, and as certainly as very young women, that our bodies and our faces will be evaluated as to whether they conform to dominant culture ideals and whether they are pleasing to those ideals. And we can take it further. We can talk about Eurocentric beauty ideals that get given more space. We can talk about the, that burden of that all women have, no matter what they look like, the feeling that their appearance matters more than their moral capacity. And certainly studies have been done. The Girl Guides did a study where 87% of those young women polled, said that they thought it didn't matter how clever they were, it's what they looked like that mattered, which is quite heartbreaking, really, that, for many women, there's this internal tape that is constantly evaluating appearance over everything else. I think, we know enough from studies to know that, unfortunately, men have also been conditioned to do that about women. So I commented on it and I said this is objectification. And, how can we know it? You know, sometimes photographers will say to me, well, how do I create something that isn't objectifying? There's a really simple answer is um, when that person doesn't have an authentic story. So a model in a studio playing to the gaze, playing to the camera lens, doing something that she might not do in other circumstances. So let's talk about the model who's got the sort of pre-orgasmic pout and the, you know, the body posture and the question, am I shaggable, on her face. That's not selfhood. That's not embodied selfhood. That's not active doing and being. It's playing to male gaze. So it's very easy to make good fashion imagery by giving, allowing the, you know, the human being in it to have an authentic story, a real story. Has she come from somewhere? Is she going from somewhere? What's on her face? You know, how, what can we read from her face? You know, is can we assume that she has thoughts other than, can you tell me if I'm shaggable? Which is often when you start to look at imagery, that's something that especially young models are encouraged to deliver that posture. And, you know, we also have a fashion industry that is prey to predators, you know, photographers who have got a very young woman who is pliable and will take her clothes off to command. I think there's more ethics that's needed in the making of photography of women by men. I'll leave it at that, Shakaila. I think. Thank you for giving me my box.
Yeah. Sorry, that was so brilliant, Karen. And I think it's encouraged me to reflect on my own maybe biases and maybe the way I'm interpreting media too, because I think often because I have all of this insight about like, you know, like clothes and like style for personal goals and like internal gratification when you dress in a certain way and taking up space, especially as a woman of color. When I saw that, I saw empowerment. But then it's so important what you're saying is that we see so much of that and maybe not the alternative, and then we need to think about like the wider social context of it. There's been times where I've maybe just in a certain way, and then yeah, you get that response of, oh, well, you're a fashion psychologist, you're trying to be on TV, why are you looking like that? And then it's so important to interrogate that, because I should be able to dress how I want to be able to dress like exactly how I want, but then in the wider society, like, yeah, people put you in categories, and it's important to have these conversations so that we can get to a point where we are not like the clothes we wear and the style we wear is not just devoid from who we are, and then it's not just seen as like a sexy body. It's seen like the choices behind it are made clear. But sadly we're not there yet, but I think from having these conversations we'll definitely get to that point. So I think it's incredibly important to use our voices like this. So thanks for sharing that. I want to shift gear a little bit and just talk maybe more about your personal style as well. So I know back at uni, you were just so noticeable walking down the corridors or walking into a classroom. You've always like had such a bold and eclectic style. I know your head wraps just used to be just so famous. I used to see them all the time. I'd love for you to talk more like personally, like you, like how would you say that your style reflects your self-efficacy, and how do you use it intentionally to almost like boost your well-being as well?
Good question. I see my clothes as friends, and they're either armor or comfort blankets. And so, dependent on, and within that, they're also uniforms. You know, mum picking up from school compared to chilling out with friends, compared to going to a special awards ceremony. Straight away, we can see, you know, different things that we might wear. I I have a thing about proportions and textures and feel and fit on my own body.
Mm-hmm.
So it probably made me kind of ultra hyper focused, because I very early on knew that I didn't want to wear something that maybe it was in the magazine and it looked good, but I didn't like it on my own body. I was never going to wear it just because somebody had said, this is what they're all wearing.
Yeah.
And so I guess I got to know my own body, my own shape, the things that literally when I put something on, then I forget it. I don't check it. I don't think about it. I love pockets. I love practicality. So I have items of clothing that I've had for 30 years or thereabouts.
Yeah.
And because I was lucky enough back at the time, I could go to designer sample sales and get really good quality fabrics. I still fit those things. They still work. And I'm a stylist, so I adapt them. So that tends to be my attitude. Interesting, you mentioned my head wraps. They came about because when you're working on a TV show, you're invariably outside. We'd start really early. We'd maybe have to get a train up to the other end of the country, begin work. Then who knows, come back. I mean, the BBC wasn't big budgets, let me tell you. What we did have was a makeup artist, which was very lovely, because you can be standing in front of the camera and not know that actually you're shining or somebody needs. But the makeup artist also did hair. And when I first started, I mean, I think I'd previously had no hair, but it had started to grow back and I had very short hair, but I had sort of hats and earrings. It was the 80s. And the sound department would go, "Oh, you can't wear those, too much noise. You can't wear a hat, you can't have a cool looking brim because there's a shadow on your eyes." And so what I wanted to avoid was the makeup artist combing my hair every 5 minutes, because the wind will blow it and more hairspray in your face. So I just thought, let me tie it back. Let me just tie it back. And then, of course, I realized that you're just a face. So let me put some fabric round it to make it look, more TV visual. And so that kind of became a very easy and sort of a lovely way to deal with my hair and to just be able to get on with the business of presenting. What later happened was when I took them out again. I've had loads of fabric around my hair, just simply because tying it down, just get on with the work. I started to grow a grey streak through just here.
Yeah.
And it's something that you've mentioned before, but that you'd noticed that I'd said that in my mid-30s, I was told that I was looking very old, and that they didn't say they were going to sack me. They said they were going to wind me down unless I dyed out my grey streak. So I had brown hair, but then I had this natural white grey streak. And I didn't want to do that. But this is interesting. This is to my point about the way that women are objectified. I had very obviously created a sort of more intellectual approach looking at fashion. I brought Fashion Target's breast cancer over to the UK. I was personally dealing with Ralph Lauren's team. We'd created a campaign of which I was co-chair, and I've only just stepped away, where we were raising millions to educate around what had previously been a very taboo subject, talking about breast awareness. And understanding that, that was much better presenting a lump and early intervention than feeling embarrassed about it and then it becomes something worse. But that didn't count for anything. At 34, I looked too old. So it wasn't about my intellectual and moral content. It was about my appearance. And so what I did was I went to a hairdresser and I said, okay, I want to keep this white streak, but let's dye the rest of my dark hair darker and richer. So it was sort of a bit maroony, a bit, not bright colors like they are now. And then, funnily enough, at the same time, Jerry from the Spice Girls was starting to wear this blonde streak. And almost overnight, people were suddenly my hair became pop-tastic because Jerry was dyeing it. They thought I was dyeing mine. So that was one way round it. But the first time I got told mutton dressed as lamb was when I was 28. So, these value judgments are on women all the time.
Yeah. And I think a lot of women, they think they won't maybe fall prey to this until they're like way maybe into their 50s but 60s, but as we've learned, it's not much has changed. And like recent studies are talking about like 30s, late 20s, there's still this panic about not being viable enough and not being youthful enough. And then if you really interrogate that feeling further, like where does that stem from, it gets really gross when you really start to think about it. So good on you for turning that down and, you know, making sure that you're not just going to fall to their whims, because I think it's going to help women like me, women that come after me, to stand their ground and really shape like what is being seen as being beautiful and acceptable and, you know, viable in media. So I think that's brilliant. And just thinking about like your bold style and your looks, I know you said it's they're friends and it brings so much comfort. And like you mentioned before we jumped on about you conducting like style makeovers and those challenges, can you tell us a bit about those experiences, or maybe one memory where someone really transformed, like mentally, emotionally, after a makeover?
There are many memories simply because it happened every time. After the clothes show, I went on and did a program called Style Challenge, where people would come and say, I don't know what to wear. I don't know all these fashion choices. I don't know what suits me, but it would be bigger than that. It would, they were probably at a crossroads in their life. And maybe they felt their body didn't measure up and they didn't see, remember when we go back, we weren't seeing pictures of women in a range of body shapes. So many women felt disenfranchised
Yeah.
by not seeing someone they recognized. So we used to get in, top hairdressers, makeup artists, stylists, and they wouldn't get to see anything because there were no mirrors anywhere until they'd strutted the catwalk and stood in front of a full-length mirror. And this was in front of a live studio audience. And then the mirror would be spun. And those moments were so real. They would often well up. They would like, is this me? I can't believe it. Is this, like, where have I gone? And it was very, very moving to see someone kind of fall in love with themselves in the mirror and say, I never thought I could look like this, and see themselves in a completely different light.
Oh.
And I've had the opportunity to do that with personal styling as well. It wasn't a thing that I developed. I wasn't really my main core. I think more commentating was mine. But I worked for 5 years with a woman who had experienced childhood trauma, and as a result of that, she couldn't look at herself in the mirror. She couldn't have people touch her hair or touch her. I must say, before I started the work, and I did do it in a voluntary capacity, I spoke to both her psychiatrist and her psychotherapist to say, are we safe to do this? And also the woman herself really inspired me, that she had come through so much, basically childhood sexual abuse. And I wanted to help her understand that some of the instinctive choices she was making were totally right, but to give her that sense of why that neckline suited her, why that fit or that cut suited her better than that fit or that cut, so that she could start to call the clothes in her wardrobe her friends. And I took her to a top hairdresser and told her, you can't do this. She doesn't want to look in a mirror. So you need to tell her what you're doing, but tell her when you're going to touch her head. Just all of those kinds of things. Same with makeup. She'd never put makeup on. And this amazing woman became so empowered that she then was able to, I introduced her to the Federation of Professional Image Stylists, image professionals, can't quite remember what it was, but she then gave a talk to help other personal stylists understand how to work with someone when they have experienced extreme childhood trauma. That it's not just a case of going, oh, come here, I'll put you in this,
Yeah.
and it's way more than that.
Yeah.
So it was so wonderful, and for me as well, very empowering for me and very moving to me to be reminded that that's what clothes do.
Yes.
To see that transformation in someone, and then they go on and empower others.
Oh, that's such a beautifully like empathetic, like moving experience. I definitely feel like there should be that more of that crossover when it comes to like even like I was looking into research into skincare and makeup, and people are saying that dermatologists should actually work hand in hand with therapists because like there's such a
Mm.
crossover. And I do think stylists, even hairdressers as well. I'm seeing some hairdressers partner with therapists now, so I definitely think there's room for stylists to partner with people with psychology. And I mean, that's what we're trying to do. So I love that
Mm.
experience. I think that's what we should be thinking about when it comes to our makeovers. Unfortunately, I think there's been such a dark side when it comes to people wanting to have that transformative moment every time they like maybe open their wardrobe or try something on. And I think that's led to hyper consumerism, where people just want that novelty, they want to have that moment constantly, and then they're losing themselves in the process. And I've noticed, you said before you want to start people calling people citizen participants rather than consumers. I just wanted to know more about your thinking behind that, because I think that shift in how we label ourselves is going to be quite important. So, how did you get there?
So again, just waited until that had
Yeah.
stopped frozen.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And also, I'd like to say, I see that's where you are in delivering that kind of empowering information, but giving people the psychological um, resilience and confidence because of the study information. All of these things help, don't they?
Yeah.
Um, I, why I sort of started talking about being a citizen participant was because the retail industry, the fashion retail industry, but most retail industries will say it's driven by demand. If people didn't buy, then they wouldn't need to produce.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously they're just shifting the responsibility. I happen to think that, they could be producing less, but paying workers more, and
Yeah.
clearly creating it with much more sustainability factored in. Um, but we can decide that we're going to choose how we're going to engage with fashion. So, there's a talk currently of the sort of 5 per year rule. I just my own position was I did the Extinction Rebellion years ago, Nothing New in 52, and I kind of found it's so
Mm.
easy. I can get my sewing needle out. I can change things. It's sort of stayed. I haven't really bought anything new for about 5 years, apart from I probably bought about 5 new things in the last 5 years. But I recognise I have a privileged back catalogue of clothes from my earlier years, so it's easier for me to do that.
Yeah.
But it really just is about deciding who you're going to spend your money with,
Mm.
knowing a little bit about their aims and goals in order to pay their garment workers a living wage, and to reduce waste. Do they take clothes back? Do they work with upcycling collections? Do they know who their suppliers are? Do they work with producers who have not put loads of chemicals in the ground or
Yeah.
treated their animals badly? Just all of those things. So we can't necessarily be across everything all of the time. But if we decided that our purchases, the power of the purse, were going to make a difference, imagine if every one of us decided that. That
Mhm.
would be massive. So
Yeah.
that's my personal space. And hopefully more and more people will find their way of uh, challenging their industry to do better, because it absolutely has to.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I think definitely that's something people are starting to ask, not just focus so much on like fast fashion or like mid fashion, they're focusing on luxury fashion too. I read a report
Mhm, mhm.
recently that said that luxury, like maybe 40% of the luxury products are being made for 4% of the customers. And there's just a lot of sameness. Like we're seeing Prada, Fendi, Gucci producing the same back loafers, and like the Row and like Hermes, they're producing the same things, and the price tags are just exorbitant. I know you talked about Louis Vuitton men's, like the bag, it was like north of £20,000. But then some people in luxury will say, it's the quality, it's the pieces, and it's the prestige, it's the name. But it's hard, isn't it, to justify that in the current recession. But then I know some people say, well, certain people can afford that, so it should be fine. I guess I wanted to know more on your stance about that. Like, can you have luxury? Can it be ethical? Does luxury have like still a place in our current like climate?
So it does feel to me that you pay for the craft, the artisanal craft
Yes.
of something being well made by an extremely practiced and knowledgeable hand. But you can get that in the sustainable field.
Mm-hmm.
So the craft itself is not that expensive. What a lot of people are paying for is the huge advertising campaigns, the all of the swanky packaging, the celebrity endorsements. So in luxury settings, that has to be factored in. Who's going to pay for that? My big question would always be, even for sort of luxury names, there's an element of mass production. It's not all artisanal
Yeah.
one-offs. So I would want to be tracing back their their sort of sourcing and their makers, because I'd want to know at the end of the day who is actually making that, and are they getting a portion of the money, of the cost. And I honestly feel they're probably not. um, I would imagine that any luxury business is, unless it's saying we are prioritizing these things, we are fair trade, this is our
Yeah.
policy on waste, then it's not doing it. So I wouldn't want to dictate. And clearly for some people that kind of positive self-enhancement that they feel only happens with high priced items, that's a relationship that they're having. That's the story they're telling themselves and engaging with. For me, positive self enhancement happens when I can tell the story of my clothes that have been ethically produced. And so, we're humans. All humans are different. We've all got different approaches to things. But I'd like to think that as we go forward, we can see that it's well worth spending money on something that honors the person who makes it,
Yes.
over puts money in the big luxury holding company's bank account.
Brilliant. I think that's perfectly said, and I think that's so true. I've sometimes I go on Instagram or I look at maybe my peers and I see them with their designer bags and I think, oh, I need one. And then I look at the brand and they've said racist things in the past, or like they have no representation, they don't show women like me. And then it's like, why do I want that? Why do I want that? Like you said, if they put so much money in the advertising, in the marketing, that's caused me to have that shift. And it's better to put your money in a place that reflects you, that you connect with, that you know it's made in a way that aligns with your beliefs. And now I'm hoping people are starting to see that. But yeah, it's
Mm,
taking a while to it's a paradigm shift, right? It's not going to happen overnight, but I
yes.
think we're definitely on our way. Caryn, thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like I can talk to you forever. Thanks for bearing with our internet issues trying to conspire against us, but we made it. Just to wrap up, I want to find out, like, what are you working on now, and where can people find out more about you and your amazing work?
Oh, thank you. So let's just see. Well, I'd love to give my book a little mention.
Yes.
I did it last year, and it's available on audio and all of the, on Spotify now. So if you have a Spotify account, you can access it there. But on all of the audio places, it's called Skewed:
Mm-hmm.
Decoding Media Bias. And I worked with Professor Keon West. So I looked at my experiences of fashion through a psychology lens, and we both looked at sort of race, gender, sexuality, age, appearance, those sort of identity issues that no matter if we think we have been um, conditioned to think a certain way about ourselves and others. So for me, just on one count, it was very important to look at my racism and to look at how I'd absorbed that as white privilege, and to make that much more visible as a conversation. And that's one of the things that I feel quite strongly about. I've been working in an organization called Fashion Academics Creating Equality, which is a Black-led organization looking at decentering the white Eurocentric perception of image, of appearance, of design, of craft, of even ways that we lead, ways that we create teams, all those things that have been handed down to us. And for the most part, some of us have had to assimilate a little bit and others have had to assimilate a lot, because that's the one system. So being able to work with them has been really fantastic. The sort of commercial projects that I've will be working on are, well, they're not really commercial because I'm mostly academic now, but the Appearance Matters event in June maybe, which is looking at influencers, looking at the power of influencers, because just to kind of bring things almost full circle, I find influencers really exciting. Although I started the campaign in 2009, All Walks Beyond the Catwalk, which was about bringing in, age, skin tone, identity difference, body difference. We didn't have social networking then. It's only now that influencers have begun to speak their truth about themselves and their experience, that they have been able to empower others. But we also have influencers who aren't citizen participants and who are given money to promote something that they haven't necessarily checked out. So how do we protect people against that? So that's been something that I've been researching about. And don't get me started on the AI influencers, which brands are now using to, and have said quite categorically, oh yeah, well, we can make them say what we want. Whereas a real life interview might bring a bit of critical thinking to it.
There's ethics into
So
it, yeah.
yes. Yes. So, great that you're out there, Shakaila, and, you're empowering from your platform and joining up the dots with lots of other empowered humans who are speaking their truth. A very exciting time. So thank you for this moment.
Thank you so much, Caryn. And I just want to thank you as well. I think you were very instrumental as well in my start, not just from speaking with me and just being so gracious whilst we were at uni, but also, giving me my shot with a writing gig on All Walks Beyond the Catwalk and a little section in ID magazine. Like, I don't think people like you realize how much you give people like me like an opportunity and open their mind up to like different avenues. So I really just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for helping
Oh,
my journey. And I want people to know all about more of your posts. Like Caryn on Instagram is amazing. Like I love your captions. Can you shout out your handle so people
oh
can
yes,
follow
it's
you?
Franklin on Fashion.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I forgot that. So love to meet some of your friends on there.
Yes.
But thank you very much, Kayla. It's been a lovely time chatting to you, and I'm so thrilled for you. You are a leader.
Thank you so much, Caryn. And that has been the final episode of this series of Big Jess Energy, the podcast. The content doesn't stop there. You can follow us on Instagram, Fashion is Psychology, me at Shakaila Elise on Instagram as well. Of course, we have our website, fashionisspsychology.com, where we have new generation fashion psychologists submitting their articles, their research, so you can get more of these fantastic insights and hear about all of the new research that people are thinking about when it comes to buying, style, behavior, everything like that. So make sure you follow on. And if you want to learn more, our Introduction to Fashion Psychology online course is still available. It's running. I think we have now about 12 to 15 dedicated students, and it's just going well. They have such an amazing time, great feedback. So make sure you check it out. And that has been the Big Jess Energy podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.